Abu Bakr did not change the masjid at all. Umar radiallahu an was the first one to solidify it a little bit, put pillars of wood and a real rain protected roof, right? A waterproof rain. Umar ibn al-Khattab was the one who did it, and he expanded it by 10-15 rows, not that much. And then by the time of Uthman, he really had to expand it, and so he maybe by around 50% he expanded it. So Uthman did a major expansion when Uthman's distant cousin, the next Umayyad Khalifa a few generations down, Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik, the Umayyad Khalifa, in around 96, 97 Hijrah, if I'm not mistaken. In 97 Hijrah, Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik was the one who destroyed the entire old mosque. And he built what we would call a proper structure, which was very decorated and very fully expensive structure for the time. And he was the one, by the way, who incorporated the grave of the Prophet ﷺ in the house of Aisha into the masjid. Right? Because the house of Aisha was outside the masjid. This is a common misconception or myth. The Prophet ﷺ was not buried in the masjid. He was buried in his house. And his house was outside the masjid. It was connected to it, but it was outside it. And for almost 100 years, that was the way things were. It was only in the time of Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik that he literally more than doubled the space of the masjid in all four directions. And he is the only person in our entire history to do so. No one before or after him did this. And the expansion that we have currently in the direction of the Qibla and in the direction of the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, that expansion is the expansion of Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik. Because all of you who have been to Medina know, where does the Imam stand? Not where the Prophet ﷺ used to stand. Like 15 rows ahead, right? Where does the Imam stand? He stands. Now the khutbah is given exactly where the Prophet ﷺ used to give it. So the Imam, when he gives the khutbah, he actually has to walk the distance of this masjid. Literally, he gives the khutbah there, and then he walks through the crowd to lead the salah. Right? Because they didn't want to move the mimbar. That's a blessed mimbar place. But Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik, for reasons that are beyond the scope of this class, he decided to expand in all four directions. So he expanded in the direction of the Qibla. He added basically 10-15 rows. He also expanded in the direction of the houses of the Prophet ﷺ. And so he incorporated all of the houses, and sadly he demolished all of the houses of the Sahaba and even the Prophet ﷺ, other than the house of Aisha, right? Because that's where he's buried. And it did cause a little bit of a controversy at the time. There were no Sahaba alive. When this happened, all the Sahaba are gone, right? A number of Tabi'un objected. Some of them, because of them is Sa'id ibn Jubayr. He objected because he said, you are including the grave inside the masjid, and grave should not be inside masjids. This is Sa'id ibn Jubayr speaking. One of the great, this is called Fuqaha al-Sab'a, the 7 scholars of the Tabi'un. Sa'id ibn Jubayr is number one of them. And he objected because, Islamically speaking, graves and masjid should be two separate things, as we know. Right? And he felt very uncomfortable about doing this. And usually politics goes and wins over a religious clergy, so this is what happened. And others objected as well because they said, you are destroying the heritage of the Prophet ﷺ and the wives of the believers, the mothers of the believers, let these buildings remain so that people see how simply the Prophet ﷺ lived. Now subhanAllah, even within a century, luxury began. Even with the century, the clothes and the money and the buildings and the structure, we know this by numerous narrations. Even the later Sahaba, their lifestyle was 10 times better than the earlier Sahaba. We know this by numerous narrations, right? This is amongst the Sahaba. How about in the Umayyad times? So, a group of the scholars said, you should leave those buildings so that the Muslims see how simply the Prophet ﷺ lived. But Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik had his reasons, and so all of the other houses were destroyed other than the house of Aisha, and it was included inside the masjid. Let me just say, it was basically to oust out the opposition from the Ahl al-Bayt. Because the Umayyads' biggest threat was from the Ahl al-Bayt, the proto-Shia. Not the Shia, these people, the proto-Shia, the original Shia, which we have said, the original Shias, Ahl al-Bayt, were not theologically different from us. they were politically different. We said this before, right? They were theologically the same. And the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ genuinely viewed themselves as being more rightly entitled to the Khilafah. And this is a legitimate opinion. I mean, it's not going to make anybody deviant or incorrect. This is a position. And they didn't consider Yazid and the others to be valid. So he wanted to basically expel them from, they used to still live in the houses of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Where are they going to live? They've inherited the houses down. So they used to still live next to the masjid, and they used to still have access to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. One theory basically has it that by doing this, he forced them to go far outside the city, and he basically forced them to not have the weight of the grave of the Prophet ﷺ in the background, basically, right? Which is a very interesting theory, and actually makes a lot of sense. Actually makes a lot of sense, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, inshallah. The grave of the Prophet ﷺ is well documented. Nobody has been inside the actual chambers of Aisha for at least 11 centuries. And nobody should go inside. There are still keys to get you to some inner chambers, but not the innermost chamber. The actual house of the Prophet ﷺ was not bigger than 10 feet by 10 feet, let's say, a very small room. This was not a large mansion. And yet the modern day grave is at least 60 feet or so, or something. It's massive, right? If not more than 60 feet actually, right? It's a massive place. What happened was, over the centuries, people continued to build walls and barriers between the original house of Aisha and the external grave, or the external people, excuse me. When Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik built the extension, the tabi'un who were alive did not want the grave to be in the direction of the Qibla, because then you'd be facing the grave when you prostrate. So they built 3 walls around it, and then facing the Qibla they built 2 walls, i.e. a pentagon totally. And the 2 walls were not in the middle mixing, they went a little bit astray, so that anybody facing it was facing a slanted wall basically. So psychologically they're not facing the grave. This was built in the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, right? And this was the time as well that when they were building the wall, one of the walls of Aisha's house collapsed, which shows you, of course, it's a human structure, it's not going to last forever, right? And they saw 2 exposed feet, and everybody panicked. They were completely undecomposed, completely fresh. Everybody panicked because they felt this might be the feet of the Prophet ﷺ, and they called the elders of the community, and they figured out, no, this is not him, this is Abu Umar ibn al-Khattab. So the wall that was Umar's side fell down, right? So they covered that up with sand, and then they built, as I said, the pentagonal structure. This is in Walid ibn Abdul Malik. Then over the course of the next centuries, the pentagonal structure was then another large room, and then another room, and then an octagonal structure roughly in this 5th century. And then the Ottomans built a grail, a large grail, a massive grail. And then the Saudis came and they put a curtain, and then they built another grill around the curtain. And therefore, if you actually look in, you will firstly not see anything other than what your imagination tells you are seeing, right? But secondly, if you could actually flash, and I have lived there for 10 years, so I know this, I have been there plenty of times, I have seen. If you were actually could see inside, all you would see is a green covering, a cloth, that is covering another grail. There are in fact 2 grails, both built by the Ottomans basically. One of them is an inner, older Ottomans, and others an outer Ottoman. And the Saudis have basically let that stand. And the green dome on top was built by, subhanAllah, the name is in the tip of my tongue, Qalawun, who was the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt in 672 or so Hijrah, right? Around 672 or so, Nasir ibn Qalawun. He was the one who built the green dome. Ironically, the dome was not green when it was built. The dome has gone through at least half a dozen colors, from white to yellow to black. to green was actually pretty recent in the grand scale of things. I think only 200 years or so ago, right? And so the dome was not green. Originally it was white. But the dome was added on pretty recently in the grand scale of things, i.e. 600 years ago, not 1,000 years ago. So the point being that in our times, there is even in our books of history, it says that one of the sultans, and that is Nuruddin al-Zangi, he actually built a moat of iron, lead, around the grave by a distance, because, and again these are stories, Allahu A'lam, because it is said that two people, non-Muslims, tried to steal the body of the Prophet by digging a grave there. So he built this moat around it, and he then fortified it again. So Nuruddin was one of those who built yet another fortified wall. So in our times, one of my teachers tells me that he has been inside, not the grave, but there is still a number of structures. You can go inside. You can go inside 2 or 3 structures basically, and they go back maybe 600 years, right? So he has been inside, and he tells me that in fact you have to go down at least 20 feet, which actually makes complete sense for those who know geography and geology, right? Lands go up and down. And so the actual house of the Prophet ﷺ is probably not even in the level that we think it is. It's actually down, right? And throughout all of these centuries, we've just built on top. Allahu A'lam. This is what he told me, that he had to go down staircases and go into, and then they stop. At a certain point, they stop, and they're not allowed to go beyond this point. Wallahu A'lam. Inshallah, we have to